Hello students. So students, in the previous session we started studying about the demonstrative experiments, and as I told you previously as well, these demonstrative experiments, they are also called as the spottings. Now in the previous session we studied about spot A, where we studied two specimens. The first one is TS of sunflower root and the other one is TS of maize root. Then we moved on to specimen B. Now specimen B has a number of specimens, and all these specimens, they show certain modification in plant parts. The first one is modification in roots. So we studied fusiform root, fasciculated root, epiphytic root, hostorial and sucking roots, stilt root and respiratory roots as an example for modification of roots. And then we moved on to the modification of stem. So here we studied rhizome as an example of underground stem, runner as an example of subaerial stem, and phylloclad as an example of aerial stem. After this, we studied the modification of leaves, where we took two examples, the phyllodes and the leaf tendrils. Then we studied about specimen C. Now specimen C has two specimens, and both the specimens are the types of inflorescence. So the first type of inflorescence that we studied is cymose inflorescence, and the second one is racemose inflorescence. Then specimen D or spot D. Now spot D has all the specimens which are plant specimens, and we studied the two subkingdoms of plants, that is the cryptogams and the phanerogams. In cryptogams, we studied about the three divisions, the thallophyta, bryophyta and the pteridophyta. So in thallophyta, we studied about chlamydomonas and sargassum as examples. In bryophyta, we studied about funaria. And in pteridophyta, we studied about nephrolepis. Next, phanerogams, we studied the two divisions, the gymnosperm and the angiosperm. In gymnosperm, we took the example of cycas, and in angiosperm, we took the example of Catharanthus roseus. So students, these were the specimens that we have covered up in the previous session, correct? Now in this session, we are starting with spot E. And in spot E, there is only one specimen, that is the experiment. So this experiment, it has an aim. The aim of the experiment is to study the rate of respiration in flowering buds, leaf tissues or germinating seeds. Okay. Now this is the aim of the experiment. Let us see the principle of this experiment. Now we know that the rate of respiration, it is always higher in young actively growing parts, or you can say the young actively growing meristematic tissue. So this means that the young part of the plant, or you can say the immature ones which has a scope of growth, in these part the rate of respiration will always be higher as compared to the older and the mature parts. And there is always a direct relationship between the amount of protoplasm in the part and the rate of respiration. That means if there is more protoplasm, the rate of respiration is always going to be higher. So this is a direct relationship between the protoplasm and the rate of respiration. Now to conduct this experiment, we require some material. So let us see what do we require. The first and the most important thing is the Genong's respirometer. So students, this is the instrument. This is called the Genong's respirometer. Other than this, we'll need some fresh flowers or some fresh and new immature leaves or some germinating seeds. And then we'll need saline water. We'll need a stand to arrange the whole apparatus of Genong's respirometer. And then we'll need KOH pellets, that is potassium hydroxide pellets. So these are the materials that we require to conduct this experiment. Now let us also see the procedure. The first thing that you have to see is the Genong's respirometer, which consists of a bulb-shaped structure. Okay, so there is this bigger bulb and a smaller bulb. Now in this smaller bulb, you have to add some germinating seeds, or if you have some fresh and fresh flowers in bud condition, you can add that, or if you have some leaves, you can even add that. So in this case, we'll consider germinating seeds. So in this smaller bulb, you have to add the germinating seed. And then if you see this bent tube is attached to one side of a pipe. This is a rubber pipe, and the other side of the pipe is attached to the other tube. Now this tube or the leveling tube will have the KOH solution. So if you remember, we took KOH pellets, and these KOH pellets, they are required for making the KOH solution. Now let me also tell you the function of this KOH solution. The KOH solution, it does the function of absorbing the carbon dioxide during the process of respiration. Okay, now this respirometer or the respiroscope, it is fixed on this particular stand, as you can see in the picture, and it is enclosed with this stopper. So it is enclosed so that there is no outer air coming in. So the enclosed air in the flask, it is completely cut off from the outer atmosphere, and then this particular apparatus, it is left undisturbed for about few hours. After few hours, what do we observe? We observe that the level of KOH solution in this tube, it will rise. Okay, and this level, this saline water level, it will go down. And with this observation, what can we conclude? So we can draw a conclusion that the germinating seeds, they used the oxygen during their aerobic respiration, and as they used up the oxygen during their aerobic respiration, they evolved some carbon dioxide, and the carbon dioxide that was evolved, it was absorbed by the KOH solution. Okay, and as the KOH solution absorbs all the carbon dioxide, the level of carbon dioxide rises, and so you can see the KOH solution rising in this leveling tube. So greater the difference between the level of the solution, higher is the rate of respiration. And with this, we can also conclude that the rate of respiration, it is found to be maximum in the germinating seeds. So students, for spot E, this is the experiment that will be set up, or I will be putting this particular picture. Now, for writing it in your journal, you can use the content from this particular slide, but the picture of this experiment you will find on page number 112 of your handbook. Okay, so you can draw the picture from page number 112 of your handbook, but you can use the content of this particular slide. So students, this was about specimen E. Now let us move to specimen F. Specimen F is having the first specimen as a TS of hyaline cartilage. Now this hyaline cartilage, it is present within the trachea. It is present at the ends of your long bones, the sternal part of your ribs, and inside your nasal septum. Okay. Now this cartilage, it forms the skeleton of a vertebrate embryo, or it can also form a skeleton of the cartilaginous fishes. Now if we study about the transverse section of this hyaline cartilage, the outermost protective covering of this cartilage is called as perichondrium. So this perichondrium, it is made up of white fibrous tissue, and it is supplied by the blood vessels. Now below the perichondrium, there are some cells. These cells, they are called as chondroblast. So these are the chondroblast, and all the chondroblasts are enclosed within the lacuna. So there is a matrix which is present in which the chondroblasts are placed. The chondroblasts within the lacuna are found all scattered in this matrix. And this matrix, it is called as the chondrin. Now this chondrocytes or the chondroblast, they undergo division. So as you can see, in each of the lacuna, there are either 3 of the chondroblast, or you can see 4, or you can just find singles or the doubles. Okay, so this is because they undergo division. So because of this division, there are n number of different numbers of chondroblast or the chondrocytes which are present in the lacuna. Now, what is the function of this hyaline cartilage? This cartilage, it provides a slight flexibility, and it also provides rigidity to trachea. Okay, and it also does the function of prevention. So it prevents it from collapsing. And if it is present at the ends of your long bones, or you can say if it is present at the joints, it will prevent the friction between the two bones. So suppose there are two bones which are attached with a joint in between. Now if there is no hyaline cartilage present in between the two bones, there will be a friction which will damage the surface of the bone. Okay, so to avoid this friction, there is this hyaline cartilage present. So this was about the transverse section of hyaline cartilage, which can be the first specimen for spot F, and the diagram for this specimen you will find on page number 106 of your handbook. The next one is transverse section of mammalian bone. So students, if you take a transverse section of the mammalian bone, this is the structure that you see. So the bones, they form the major part of the endoskeleton in most of the vertebrates, as we know. And if we take the transverse section, the outermost covering, it is called the periosteum. The periosteum is the outermost covering which is present over here, and the ground substance is called the matrix. Now in the bone or in the matrix, there are a number of Haversian systems. So if you see these circles which are present, each one of them is called the Haversian system. Each of this Haversian system will be having a Haversian canal in between, and they will have some concentric layers. So outer to the Haversian canals, there are these concentric layers, and these concentric layers, they are called as the lamella. And in between the lamella, there is the lacuna present. So if you see, this is a magnified picture of the lamella. Now in between the lamella, the middle part, there is a matrix which is called the lacuna. So the bone cells or the osteocytes, they are present in the lacuna. And the processes which is given out by the osteocytes, they pass through these canals. So the osteocytes, as you can see, they are connected by each other through this connective thing which is called as canaliculi. And the parallel lamella, they are present at the periphery, and the interstitial lamella, they are present in between the Haversian system. So again, the diagram for the TS of mammalian bone is on page number 107 of your handbook. The next specimen is striated muscle, which is also called as the skeletal muscle or the voluntary muscle. So this is a number of elongated cylindrical fibers which lie parallel to each other, as you can see. So this is one fiber, and all the fibers, they are parallel to each other, arranged in this parallel manner, and that is how they form this striated muscle. Now each of this muscle, if you see each fiber, it will have a prominent dark and a light band. Okay, and so they appear striated or stripped. Now there are many nucleus that are present in each of this fiber, and each of this fiber, they are surrounded by a thin sheet which is called as sarcolemma. So all the voluntary muscles of your body, that is your hands, legs, or you can say the face or the tongue, they are made up of these striated muscles, and they perform the function of carrying out the voluntary movement in your body. Next, studying about the non-striated muscle or the smooth muscles, which these are also known as the involuntary muscles. That means they carry out the involuntary movement in your body. Now these muscles, they are also elongated, but unlike the striated muscles, these are spindle shaped. That means they will have tapering ends on both the sides, and the medial part will be broad. Each of this fiber will be having one nucleus, the oval shaped nucleus, which is placed at the center, and this nucleus, it is surrounded by sarcoplasm, and the whole fiber, it is covered by sarcolemma. Okay, so several of these muscle fibers, the non-striated muscle fiber, they join together, they are loosely joined together by a loose connective tissue, and they form a bundle of this smooth muscle. Now students, the diagram for these two you will find on page number 108 and 109 of your handbook. So I'll tell you again that to write the content for these two specimens, you can refer to this content in the slide, but the diagram you have to refer from your handbook on page number 108 and 109. Now let us see the next one, that is the cardiac muscle. So cardiac muscle fibers, they are cylindrical, and the fibers are branched, okay, and they are united with each other, and also they are multinucleated. Now as you can see, just like the striated muscles, the cardiac muscles also have the light and the dark band, which are very prominent, and the two adjacent cells or the two adjacent muscles, they are separated from each other by a distinct intercalated disc. Okay, And again, even this particular muscle, the cardiac muscle, it is surrounded by a sheath which is called as sarcolemma. And these muscles, they form the wall of the heart. That means they form the myocardium of the heart. And the diagram for this particular cardiac muscle is on page number 109 of your handbook. Now next, let us see the spot G. Now spot G is having two specimens. The first one is the external feature of cockroach. So cockroach, the zoological name of cockroach is Periplaneta americana. So let us study about the external feature of cockroach. Now first thing, the morphological feature, they are laterally symmetrical, reddish brown in color, triploblastic and cleomate. Okay, what do you mean by triploblastic? It means they are made up of 3 germ layers, and it is a cleomate animal. So cockroach, which is a common house pest, it is nocturnal. What do you mean by nocturnal? Nocturnal means that it is only active during night time. It is omnivorous and cursorial. Cursorial means that it can run fast. Now it is elongated and dorsoventrally flattened, as you can see in this picture over here. And the body of the cockroach, it is protected by a hard chitinous exoskeleton. So in this case, in cockroaches, there is an exoskeleton present. Now, each body segment has 4 parts. It has the dorsal tergum, the ventral sternum, and the 2 lateral pleura. And body is segmented and divided into the head region, the thorax region, and the abdomen region. So there is a small head which is attached to the thorax with a short neck in between. This short neck, it is called as cervicum. Now the head, it bears 2 compound eyes, and there will be 2 antennas which are present, and then the fenestra. What is fenestra? Fenestra are the 2 white spots which are present at the base of the antenna. And of course, it will have the mouth part. Now let us see the thorax region. The thorax region, it is made up of 3 parts. The prothorax, the mesothorax, and the metathorax. So thorax on dorsal side, they produce 2 wings. The first pair is dark and the second one is light. Okay. Now the second one, as you can see over here, the second one, it is thin and it is transparent. Now the first one, it is protective in function, whereas the second one, it is used for flying. The thorax on the ventral side, so this was on the dorsal side. On the ventral side, if you see, the thorax, it bears 3 pairs of joint legs. Okay, so on the ventral side, that is the back side, you will see 3 pairs of joint legs. And this is used for walking and running for this particular insect. The abdomen, they are made up of, it is made up of 11 segments, where you can see the 10th and the 11th segment, it is fused together. Now, the male and the female cockroach can be separated or it can be distinguished. The male cockroach, it will bear a pair of anal style at the 6th segment. So if you see, this is the male cockroach, and at the 9th segment, sorry, not the 6th segment, on the 9th segment. On the 9th segment, you will see an anal style which is present only in male, and it will not be present in a female cockroach. So this is one distinguishing features between 2. Now in both male and female, the 10th segment, it bears a pair of cerci. So this is a pair of cerci which is present in both male as well as female. Now this pair of cerci, it is sensitive to movement. It is sensitive to air, sound, and any kind of vibration. So students, the diagram for this particular picture you will find on page number 117 of your handbook, and the content you can copy down from this particular slide. The next specimen for spot G is the digestive system of cockroach. Now the digestive system of cockroach, it consists of the alimentary canal and the digestive glands. The alimentary canal, it consists of these following parts. The first one is preoral cavity. Now, this cavity, it lies in front of the mouth, okay, and it is made up of the mouth parts. Now, if we study about the mouth, it is a small aperture which is present on the anterior side over here, and it opens up into the pharynx. Okay, so this is the pharynx region. Now pharynx, it is a short vertical tube as you can see in this picture, and the pharynx, it will open up into the esophagus. Esophagus, again, it is a narrow tube that is running through this neck region, and it opens up into the crop region. So this swollen part that you can see, the bag-like structure that you can see, this is the crop. So the esophagus, it dilates into the large bag which is called the crop, and the function of this crop is to store the food. But the storage is only for a short time. Then the crop will give rise to the gizzard. So gizzard, it is a thick-walled conical muscular organ which is present at the lower part of the crop, and this is mainly for grinding and filtering of the food. The crop will give rise to gizzard, and then the gizzard will give rise to the hepatic ceca. So the hepatic ceca, here there are 8 blind tubes which are present, and these blind tubes, they are lined by glandular cells. So if you can see, there are 4 tubes on either sides, and the function of these tubes, it is to secrete the digestive enzymes which is required for churning, grinding and the filtering of this food. Then comes the midgut, okay, or which is also called as the mesenteron. So it is a short tube which is located between the gizzard and the hindgut. Okay, so this is the gizzard and this is the hindgut. In between there is this midgut that is present, which is also called as mesenteron. So in this midgut, the digestion and the absorption of the food, it takes place. Now the midgut will give rise to the hindgut, and hindgut, it consists of the ileum, which is a short and a tubular structure over here. This part that gives rise to the colon. Colon, it is a long and a coiled structure, and then the last part is the rectum. So rectum, it is a broad terminal part of the hindgut, and this opens up into the anus. So at the junction of the midgut and the hindgut, there are about 60 to 80 pale yellow, hair-like structures which are present. These hair-like structures are called as the Malpighian tubule. And the function of this Malpighian tubule is excretory in function. That means they are used as an excretory organ. Okay. Now let us also see about the salivary glands. Now salivary glands, these are paired structures which are actually situated at both the sides of the crop, and there are certain ducts which are present. The ducts, they arise from this glandular portion of the salivary glands, and they unite as a common duct, and the 2 common ducts, they join to form an efferent salivary duct which opens up at the base of the hypopharynx. Okay. So it will open up over here. Now let us see specimen H. Now specimen H is having bones of your forelimbs and the bones of your hind limbs. Now there are 2 bones of your forelimb. The first one is humerus and the second one is the radius and the ulna. Let us first study about humerus and then we'll move to the radius and the ulna. Okay, so the first type of the forelimb is the humerus, and the humerus, it is the bone of your upper arm. Now, if you see the proximal end, it is articulated with the scapula, and it is having a distal end which is connected to the radius and the ulna. So radius and ulna is basically the bones of your lower arm. Okay, so the distal end of humerus will be connected to the radius and ulna, which is the part of your, or you can say which is the lower arm. If we speak about the humerus, it is a long cylindrical bone containing the proximal round head. On either side, there are small projections with basipetal grooves which is present in between. The main body is called the shaft. So this is the shaft. The lower end, it is triangular and it is expanded. Its outer part, that is the capitulum, articulates with the head of the radius, and the inner part, that is the pulley, or you can say the trochlea, this articulates with the concavity of the ulna. And the olecranon fossa, this olecranon fossa of the humerus, this will articulate with the olecranon process of the ulna. Okay, so once again, the outer part, this part will articulate with the head of radius. The inner part or the trochlea, this will articulate with the concavity of ulna, and the olecranon fossa of the humerus, this will articulate with the olecranon process of the ulna. And it also bears some lateral and medial epicondyles. So if you can see, there is this epicondyle which is present over here and the epicondyle which is present over here. Okay, so these are the two sides of the humerus bone. The next one, the bone of forelimb, the other bone is the radius and the ulna. So these are the bones of the lower arm. The radius on the thumb side and the ulna on the little finger. Okay, so if you see your hand, on your thumb side is the radius and towards your little finger is the ulna. And there is a gap between the two bones. So the gap between the two bones, this is filled by a membrane, and this membrane is called as the interosseous membrane. Now the radius, let us see about the radius. Radius, it is the lateral bone of the forearm. Its shaft, it has an outer convexity and it shows a proximal head. Okay, and the proximal head, it will articulate with the capitulum of the humerus. So this proximal head, it will articulate with the capitulum of the humerus. The head articulates with the radial notch on the ulna. So over here, you can see that there is a trochlear notch that will articulate with this region over here. Okay, the lower end, it has long styloids. So there are the styloid process which are present on both the sides in the radius and the ulna. The proximal end of the ulna, it has a trochlear notch, as I already told you. Then it also has the coronoid process and the olecranon process. The olecranon process, it forms the elbow joint with the humerus. Okay, so as I already told you that the olecranon process, it will receive the olecranon fossa of the humerus and it will form the elbow joint. So this is about the bones of your forelimb, that is the humerus forming the upper arm and radius and ulna forming the lower arm. Next, let us study about the bones of hind limb. The first bone of hind limb is the femur bone. Femur bone, it is also known as the thigh bone. It is the longest and the toughest, or you can say the strongest bone of the body. It is divided into the proximal end, the shaft and the distal end. The upper end will have this head region, okay, that articulates with the hip bone. Below the head, there is this neck region that is present. So below head is the neck. Greater or lesser, it is a trochanter and a small depression which is called as the foveas. Then the shaft is narrow. Okay, there is a narrow shaft in the center. The lower end of the femur, it consists of the lateral condyles which are separated from each other by intercondylar fossa. So there is the lateral condyle, and these lateral condyles, they are separated from each other by intercondylar fossa, or you can say this notch which is present. This articulates with the tibia and the patella that forms the knee joint. Okay, so tibia and patella, this will form the shanks, or you can say the shin bone of your legs or of your hind limbs. Tibia and fibula, they are connected to each other by proximal and the distal end, and the gap again, it is filled up by a membrane. So if you see, there is a gap which is filled up by the membrane, and the membrane is called as interosseous membrane. Tibia, this is the tibia. It is a large and a stout bone, and it is present on the middle side. Okay. Proximal end of the tibia, it is expanded and it has a medial and the lateral condyles. Distal end of tibia, it has a strong process which is known as the medial malleolus. So this is the medial malleolus which is present on the distal end. Now it articulates with the distal end of the femur and forms the knee joint. So this will articulate, this part will be articulate with the femur bone, and it will also form the knee joint. Let us see the fibula. Fibula, it is a long slender bone which is present lateral. Distal end of fibula, it develops the lateral malleolus, and this bone, it does not articulate directly either with the patella or with the femur. Okay, so it is only the tibia bone that will articulate with the patella and the femur bone. Fibula will not articulate with the patella or the with the patella or the femur bone. Now the diagrams for these two you will find on page number 135 and 136 of your handbook. The next one is patella. The patella is also known as the knee cap. Okay, so it is a flat circular triangular bone which is present here. It sits in front of the knee joint, and it protects the joint from the damage. It is the large sesamoid bone. Now what do you mean by a sesamoid bone? A sesamoid bone is the bone which is present or which is placed into these tendons, or you can say which has a ligament on the outer side. Okay, so it is the largest sesamoid bone in the body, and it lies within this quadriceps tendon. So the diagram for the patella you will find on page number 136 of your handbook. The next one, specimen eye. The first specimen for spot eye is cycon, which is also known as the marine sponge, and these are usually found attached on the rocks into the water beds. Now it occurs as a colonial sponge. Okay, so there will be they will never be appearing as a single one. They will always be appearing with several cylindrical hollow branches. The body, as you can see, it is vase shape, and it is having this large opening on the top which is called as the osculum, and on the whole body it will have some dermal osteas. So the dermal osteas or the pores which are present on the other parts of the body. Also the body is made up of by calcareous needles, and these needles, they are known as the spicules. Now sponges or the cycons, they are hermaphrodite. That means they are bisexual in nature, and they reproduce by asexual means or the sexual method. The diagram for this you will find on page number 74 of your handbook. The next specimen is Ascaris lumbricoides, which is also called as the roundworm. And this roundworm, it lives in the small intestine of humans, or you can say it lives in the small intestine of other animals as well. So when we say it lives in the small intestine, it is an endoparasite. Okay, it will live in the small intestine, and it will derive all the nutrition, it will absorb all the nutrition from the small intestine. Now let us speak about the physical appearance. The body, it is pale white, it is unsegmented, and it is cylindrical, and it will also have tapering ends on both the sides. The mouth is triangular. Okay, so it is having this triangular aperture on the anterior side, and they are guarded by broad lips. Now there is a sexual dimorphism which is seen in Ascaris. That is, the male and the female Ascaris, they can be differentiated from each other. The male is smaller in size, and it measures only about 15 to 30 centimeters in length. And the female will be larger, which measures about 20 to 35 centimeter in length. The posterior end of the male, as you can see over here, it is curved, okay, and it will show a pair of pineal seta. The females will have a blunt posterior end, a blunt and a straight posterior end, and the female gonospores are present on the mid-ventral line. Now, if a person is infected by Ascaris lumbricoides, there are certain symptoms that are seen. So the first thing is that the Ascaris, when it is in larval form, during the development, it moves to the liver, then it will move to the lungs, the spleen, kidney, the esophagus of humans, and then back to the intestine. And when it comes to the comes back to the intestine, it is found in a mature condition. So the infection of Ascaris, it will show a symptom of pain in intestine, and this pain will result in vomiting. It will result in diarrhea, constipation, and insomnia. What is insomnia? It is sleeplessness. Okay, a person cannot sleep. Then the nervous system is also affected, causing epilepsy, unconsciousness, and appendicitis. Now the diagrams for Ascaris lumbricoides you will find on page number 76 of your handbook. The content you can take from this slide, but the diagram you have to draw from the page 76 of your handbook. The last spot, spot J. The first specimen for spot J is TS of pancreas. So if we take a transverse section of pancreas, this is the structure that we see. So pancreas, they are covered by a capsule which is made up of dense connective tissue. Internally, it consists of endocrine and exocrine glandular cells. Now let us first see about the exocrine part. Exocrine part, it comprises of numerous Acini cells, while the endocrine, it comprises of a cluster of islets of Langerhans. Now, islets of Langerhans, they consist of three types of cells. The alpha cells, which are blue in color, the beta cells, which are this colored, this structure, okay, somewhat brown in color, and the delta cell, yellow in color. Okay, so these are the colors which are depicted in this particular picture. Now, alpha cell, it performs the function to secrete glucagon, and this helps in increasing the blood sugar level. Beta cell, it will release an hormone which is called as insulin, and this hormone, it will help in decreasing the blood sugar level. And the delta cell, it produces somatostatin. So somatostatin, this is a hormone which will restrict the growth or restrict the secretion of any other hormone. Then the next specimen is TS of small intestine. Now the TS of small intestine, it shows four basic layers: the mucosa layer, then there is the submucosa layer, then the muscularis and the serosa. Okay, serosa, it is made up of squamous epithelium and the connective tissue. Muscularin, it is made up of the smooth muscles which is arranged in two layers, the outer one and the inner one. The outer is the longitudinal muscle and the inner one is circular muscles. Then is the submucosa layer, which is made up of loose connective tissues. Okay, and these connective tissue, it contains blood vessels, lymph vessels and the nerves. And the last one is the mucosa layer, which will consist of these villi. Okay, so for the diagrams you have to refer to page number 124 of your handbook, and the content you can refer to this particular slide. The next one is TS of liver. Now TS of liver, as we know, liver, it is the largest gland of our body and it is covered by a thin covering. The covering is called as Gleason's capsule. Internally, the liver lobes are divided into several structural and functional units, and these are called as the hepatic lobules. Each of these hepatic lobules, they are polygonal in shape. So this is one hepatic lobule, this is one. So each one, you can see they are polygonal in shape. In between the cords of the hepatic cells, there are spaces, and these spaces it is called as sinusoids. So sinusoids, these are filled with blood, and they also contain of phagocytic Kupffer cells. So phagocytic Kupffer cells, they perform the function of phagocytosis, that means engulfing of any foreign particles in the body. Hepatic cells, they produce bile juice, and this bile juice, it is stored in the gallbladder in our liver. So students, this is the last specimen for spot J, that is the TS of liver, and the diagram for this you will find on page number 125 of your handbook. The content you can of course write from your, but the diagram you have to draw from page number 125. So students, with this we also finish all the specimens. These are the specimens that are the ones that we have to study this year as demonstrative experiments, and each spot will have one specimen that has been allotted in that particular spot. Okay, so for example, if I say in spot J you have 3 specimens, and in exam any one of these 3 specimens will be kept for spot J. So you have to study all of them. Okay, once again I would say, for the diagrams I have referred and I have mentioned the page number of the diagrams in the handbook on that particular slide. So please refer the diagrams from that particular page of the handbook, and the content you can take from this particular presentation or this particular video that I have given.